Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of Popcorn and Compliance. As you know from prior episodes, Megan Dougherty, co-founder of One Stone Creative, and I are huge MCU fans. So we've decided to do the MCU movie oeuvre. That's right. We're going to do all of the MCU movies in this special podcast series. Over this series, we will take a look at the storylines, some of the cookies and other cool things. We'll describe the great action scenes from each episode, and then we'll take a look at issues raised by each episode. It's going to be a lot of fun. We will take things from the societal angle, from the social justice angle, from the MCU angle, and perhaps even from the compliance angle. But if you're an MCU fan or you're a compliance fan, I know you will enjoy. This episode, we take up the often overlooked Iron Man 3 and dissect it for you. This podcast is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Myself and Megan Dougherty are back with a new challenge. We're going to review the entire MCU on Popcorn and Compliance. Why? Well, because it's there, and we are both MCU uber geek fans, and we wanted to do a podcast for those people who are like us. If you are like us and you want to be a guest on MCU on Popcorn and Compliance, please let us know and join the fun. We are reviewing the films as they appear in chronological order, not the MCU timeline, or rather not by release date. So today we have Iron Man 3. And I am Tom Fox, the founder of the Compliance Podcast Network and the voice of compliance.
And I'm Megan Dougherty, co-founder of One Stone Creative and host of the recently released business podcast Blueprint Show. So, Tom, what were your general impressions of Iron Man 3? Oh, yes.
So Iron Man 3 takes place after New York. So we've had the first Avengers, obviously, which we've reviewed. And in rewatching this, Megan, I guess the first thing that struck me is I forgot how much New York impacted and affected Tony Stark. A lot of the show, maybe the first half or even a little bit more, was really about him dealing with the fallout from New York, PTSD. He is staying awake for literally days at a time. He's pushing Pepper Potts away in a way he has not done before in any of the other shows. Clearly, something is wrong. He is either too arrogant or not trusting enough, but for some reason he won't get help and he can't get help. And this leads to really a catastrophic event, which is the destruction of his home on the Pacific Coast Highway in California through his own arrogance. But the PTSD really extends much beyond this catastrophic event. We see he built multiple new Iron Man suits. He challenges someone called the Assassin to find him and track him down, which leads to the destruction of his home. In a flashback scene, we see what he was like pre-Iron Man, and we are reminded of just what an overall jerk he was when he had yet another one-night stand on a New Year's, a very memorable one on a New Year's Eve many years ago, and the really leading to the start of his comeback and the start of his dealing with the PTSD comes from a young boy in Tennessee. So maybe you might give us some of your thoughts about, at least up until that point. How did you feel? What did you see? Anything new and different on this rewatching for you?
Definitely. Well, I thought the panic attacks was really interesting. I think that's something lovely about a lot of the movies in the MCU is they don't shy away from dealing with mental health. And I mean, how really could someone go through the events of his last two movies and then the Avengers and not have some level of PTSD? So, addressing that head on, I think, was a really good move. And then letting him kind of try to work through that by creating all these different versions of the suit to deal with every possible problem that might come up, to try and, protect himself, which I don't think he really feels like he can do. I mean, he is Iron Man, but Iron Man is also this suit. There's a real connection between his abilities and what he feels he can build, and having that armor around himself. And of course, being able to protect Pepper, because now that he's identified the most important thing, it must feel really terrifying because he's never had that before. So I thought it was a really great way to give us a look at kind of the inside of Tony Stark, and just how what he's feeling is affecting what he's creating in the outer world. And it never hurts to remind us what a jerk he was back in the 90s.
So what did you... It really was. I was a little disheartened by the way he pushed Pepper Potts away. And although it really was, and it was because of his PTSD, because of his untreated PTSD, but I have seen that in many other situations, generally around substance abuse, whether that substance be alcohol, whether that substance be drugs. But there's something that pushes a loved one away. And I thought that was a little bit painful and very touching, because you clearly see how much Pepper loves him and how much it hurt the way he was treating her. Maybe let's move now to through a happenstance of events. They get to a small town in Tennessee. And in many ways, that this is the heart of the movie, I thought. Because he meets a young boy whose father has left. He's being raised by a single mom who works 2 or 3 jobs, and he's basically a latchkey kid, if that term still exists. And as a latchkey kid, he is extremely smart and has built a uber scientific laboratory in his barn. And the relationship, we begin to see Tony not simply worry about protecting Pepper, but build a relationship with this younger boy. I guess he would be I can't tell if he's a young teenager or older teenager, but he's clearly a teenager. He's being bullied. And Stark gives him some pretty decent life advice, although it's wrapped around some pretty arrogant and unthoughtful comments. What did you think of that part of the movie? And am I just being a boy as to why it impacted me, or does it resonate with you as well?
No, I got it. I think Tony, deep down, he wants someone to love, right? And he doesn't like that about himself. I don't think he's comfortable with that about himself. But I love the way he treats the kid, like kind of a condescending adult, but also as a, serious other human who can help with this serious problem. And I think that was a really fun way of interacting. And I mean, the kid was adorable. Neither of them took each other's crap, basically. They were pretty hard on each other. But I thought it was a really sweet relationship. And I thought the way, especially, that the kid was able to talk him down from a panic attack or two, was a really nice kind of demonstration of, when you are vulnerable a little bit with another person, that can make a really big difference.
We also saw a medical experiment, if I can use that term, really gone awry. And that was with the treatment extremists to help prepare injured soldiers and get them back in productive members of society. And they became human bombs. And there was we've seen this kind of throughout the MCU. Obviously, the best example is Incredible Hulk. But even Spider-Man came about because of a medical experiment gone awry, although there was a spider bite. So here we have human weapons being created. And at the end of the movie, Pepper Potts is injected with this formula, which may kill her unless Tony can come and save the day. So, we've got the mad scientist thing going on as well. But I have to say, for me, the heart of the movie was really Tennessee, and he starts to make the comeback. But then, of course, after you make your comeback in a movie, you have to go confront the bad guy. And so we're off to Miami to meet the assassin. who turns out to be just a delicious character.
Oh, the Mandarin reveal.
The Mandarin reveal, I'm sorry. And that's since we have full spoiler alerts, it's Ben Kingsley, who is just playing a role as far as he knows. He doesn't understand he's leading a worldwide terrorist network. And as far as he knows, he's got 2 girls with him, and he's a happy drunk camper. It turns out there's a little bit more to his role than he realized. But I thought Ben Kingsley was just great as the Mandarin. What were your thoughts on the Mandarin?
I thought he was fabulous, and I mean, I don't think a completely unwilling dupe. I think he did shoot someone on live TV. So even in character, that's pushing it a little. But it was hilarious, and I thought it was a really interesting way of the outward facing look of this terrorist boogeyman. Is exactly what is the most terrifying thing for people in governments looking at the threats that exist elsewhere in the world. But like most threats that exist elsewhere in the world, ultimately the bad guy pulling the strings is a rich guy in a suit. So I thought that was a really good way of doing it. And the character was just hilarious.
So we get to the kind of final scene where he has to confront the bad guy and save the girl, save Pepper. And when I first saw this movie, it really, I didn't like it, and it didn't resonate with me, Megan, because the final scene is really on top of I think it's a tanker, but it's a vessel, and a lot of the fighting is flying around in the air. People are hung from the rafters, literally, above this platform that the ship is under. And it seemed to me that it was very contrived. But when I rewatched it, I felt it was much more integrated into the overall storyline. One, because Iron Man does a lot of his best work in the air, since he can fly. We have several Iron Man suits show up, which provide some backup and support for Tony. We have Colonel Rhodes shows up, and he helps Tony as Iron Man as well. Colonel Rhodes, I should say, used to be War Machine, but he's been rebranded in content marketing as the Iron Patriot. And
it's not as cool.
Yeah, it was cool, and he has a pretty cool Iron Man suit while he's at it. So that was cool as well. And I enjoyed the. I guess it seemed like it was 15 minutes, the final fight scene. I don't know if that's right or not, but it went on quite a long time. And we had Jarvis making an appearance to remotely control air support for Tony. We had the President of the United States kidnapped, Air Force One attacked. So obviously lots of action going on. And then in the sort of ultimate scene with Pepper, she is saved, and because she's had extremist powers, it allows her to survive a catastrophic fall, but Tony is able to stabilize the effects. So what were kind of your thoughts around this very long, entailed fight scene and ending? We're going to take a quick break after this message from our sponsor.
I thought it was great, and they wrapped up a lot of points that I always appreciate that in a film. I don't like hanging endings, but especially so there's the bit with Pepper, and kind of when I thought it was an oil rig, things are starting to fall apart with the suit army fighting all of the extremist super soldiers above, and Tony is trying so hard to catch Pepper because this is what he's feared the most, right? Is losing her. This is kind of his motive for the entire movie is protecting her and making sure she's safe. And he tries to catch her and he says, "I'm going to catch you." And he drops her and she falls what looks like to her death. Well, the worst absolutely happened. And I think the worst had to happen for Tony to be able to, go on and do anything else. And the other thing I thought was really interesting about all of the suits that he had spent all of this time in the past making, trying to prevent that one horrible thing that just happened. For a lot of this movie, Tony was without a full suit. The suit was broken. The suit wasn't working. He was kind of wearing his MacGyver suit from Tennessee. But after the worst happened, he got to pull together the full force of all of his suits that hadn't prevented that terrible thing. And then at the end, it even wasn't him who really saved the day and finished the fight. It was Pepper coming back and just clocking the bad guy in an extremely satisfying fashion. And I think that the worst happened, they survived it, and then they were able to go back to normal. And Tony was able to have the surgery and get the electromagnet taken out, and Pepper was returned back to human. And now they can really start a proper life together. So I really liked it. And the explosions and fight scenes were fantastic.
What did you think of the two major villains? We've talked about the Mandarin, and I guess we would have to call him a villain, although he was more of a clown in many ways. But we had Guy Pearce as Aldrich Killian, and we had Rebecca Hall as Maya Hansen. And I bring them both up together, Megan, because in researching for this podcast, Rebecca Hall said that she signed on to this movie in part because her role as a villain was going to be much more substantial. And what it ended up being was she was clearly a villain, but she was a secondary character to Aldrich Killian. I really like Rebecca Hall as an actress, and I wish she could have been sort of the primary villain in this. I thought it would have been a really interesting dynamic. She was the person he had the one night stand with, and she shows up at his home immediately before their attack to warn him. And I think the first thing out of his mouth is there a 12-year-old in the car waiting to meet me? So kind of a cliched remark that many guys, I think, would resonate with many boys and men. But she was not the primary villain. Guy Pearce was. And I thought he did a really good job. But what were maybe your thoughts on Guy Pearce as Aldrich Killian, and then Rebecca Hall role as Maya Hansen?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it would have been more interesting for Maya to be the main bad guy, if only because you don't get to see that really enough. And I think Killian was great. He was a proto bad guy, extremely hateable, not at all relatable. Even though he was relatable at the beginning when we first saw him, and he was kind of this nerdy guy who wanted to work with Tony Stark. And when he comes back, all I guess hunked out. You can tell pretty clearly immediately that he was going to be the evil guy. One thing I thought was really particularly interesting about Maya's character was the comparison she made to Werner von Braun, who developed the nuclear weapons. And his original dreams were so noble. And I thought, exploring that a little more and making a more understandable or nuanced villain could have been a really nice direction to go in, even though, ultimately, of course, you can't support what that man did or why.
Right. So, of course, we had our Stan Lee cameo, but we had another cameo in this, and it may have really extended to more than a cameo because Jon Favreau, kind of the director and executive producer through many of these MCU series, and he also plays the role as Tony's chauffeur or bodyguard or security, has a much bigger or has a role in this. And it seemed like he played it for comic relief, in my opinion, but it seemed like he was in on the joke. And he seemed like he was having fun.
Oh, yeah.
And
he was so funny.
Yeah. And he plays the head of security for Stark Industries. And at one point he goes around and checks everybody's badge. And that's
complaints are up 300%. You're welcome.
Yeah. So that was kind of interesting as well. And maybe let's turn to some of the cookies or other things that you saw. I'll start off because I was pretty stunned in this. We talked about the earlier scene where he meets Maya back in, I think it's 1999, New Year's Eve. and they do some dancing, and there's just a couple of moves Tony does, but they came straight out of Pulp Fiction. And so I love the anything that refers to Pulp Fiction, I have to shout out to. But what are two or three of your favorite cookies, Megan?
Oh, mine was a similar one, kind of right at the beginning, and this wasn't because of a pop culture reason, but that song at the beginning, the I'm Blue, that blasted me right back to 1999 at a middle school Much Music video dance party, chaperoned by nuns, with all the awkwardness you can imagine.
I didn't know you had that in your background. We're going to have to explore that at length.
I went to Catholic school until grade 10. So.
Oh.
So that was just a blast from the past with that song there. And a couple of other things I noticed were there's more parts that I just thought were really funny or well done. The little exchange between Rhodey and Tony Stark when he's trying to hack his password and get into get control of things was a great moment.
That really was good as well.
That was good. And I really enjoyed after Pepper just absolutely knocks out and destroys Killian. Just that was really violent. I don't care for this at all. It was great. And then Happy being obsessed with Downton Abbey whilst in recovery. It was very, very good.
Megan, once again, with this movie, as with several of the other movies that we've reviewed in the MCU series on popcorn and compliance, I really enjoyed it more on this viewing than I did in the original time I saw it. But there was one thing that part of the movie that I still really either didn't understand or had a question about, and I wanted to pose to you, and that's the end scene. Meaning after the movie, not the end scene of the movie, but after the final credits. And we usually get a hint or a foreshadowing or something very cool in one of these. And we'll talk about something very cool when we talk about Thor: Dark World in our next podcast. But in this one, it's Tony telling his story. And it turns out the whole movie is Tony narrating a story to Dr. Bruce Banner. Not as Incredible Hulk, but as Bruce Banner. And of course, Mark Ruffalo plays that character. And in the credits, after the credits, Dr. Banner wakes up and he's missed the entire story. And, whether or not therapists sleep through your presentations or your recitations is probably a topic for another pod, but what did you see as the reason for that, or did that foreshadow something to you, or how did you view that maybe at the time, and how do you view it now?
Well, at the time, it didn't really register as anything other than kind of hilarious. Like my first viewing, just that Bruce Banner has no interest in listening to Tony go on and on about himself, just none whatsoever. But I'm watching a little more and kind of trying to watch the movies with a bit more of an analytical eye. Well, I think it's a really great sign that Tony can talk about everything so clearly and with such great self-awareness. And he's talking to the guy who, yes, is a doctor, even if the wrong kind of doctor, but who had previously saved his life. Because the Hulk saved Tony in Avengers. So I thought that was pretty appropriate, ultimately.
That brings us to the end of this episode, and I hope our listeners will join us again for our next episode of Popcorn and Compliance, the MCU series, where we take up Thor: Dark World.
Fantastic. Thank you again, and see you next time, everybody. It was fun.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Popcorn and Compliance, the MCU series. Hope you will join Megan and I again for our next episode where we take up the Avengers. Also, I'd like to tell you about a special podcast series that recently premiered on the Compliance Podcast Network, Trial of the Century, the Enron Trial, where with business journalist Lauren Steffi, who covered the Enron trial, we take a look at the trial of Enron as opposed to the bankruptcy. I know you'll enjoy it if you like fraud, if you like trials, or just like a good story. Check it out on the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.